Friends, welcome back. Today, we are going to explore one of the biggest turning points in human history, the story of why the First World War actually happened. Many people think of it as something from another era, with kings, empires, old-style uniforms, mustaches, and black and white photos. But the reasons behind this war are surprisingly familiar. Power games, rivalries, alliances, ego battles, and one spark that changes everything. By the end of this video, you will understand how the world slowly moved step by step into a war that reshaped our future forever. Before the war began, Europe looked calm, elegant, and peaceful on the outside. Cities were growing, inventions were booming, and life felt stable. But beneath that surface, something dangerous was building up. Imagine a room filled with dry wood and everyone standing around holding burning candles. One tiny mistake could set the entire place on fire. That was Europe during that time. The first force pushing Europe toward war was nationalism. Countries across the continent were bursting with pride and ego. Germans believed they were destined to lead the continent. The French were still upset about losing territory many decades earlier. Slavic people in the Balkans wanted independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was like a neighborhood where everyone kept shouting that their house was better, their land was bigger, and their history was superior. These attitudes slowly turned into tension and resentment. The second major force was imperialism. Britain and France had vast colonies across Asia and Africa. Germany came late to this global race and felt cheated. Their emperor once said that they deserved a place in the sun. This was not just a poetic line. It was a message that Germany wanted more colonies, more land, and more recognition. This competition created jealousy, anger, and constant diplomatic fights. Then came militarism. Countries were building massive armies, huge fleets, and advanced weapons. Generals and military leaders began influencing political decisions more than sensible discussions. It was like two children constantly getting bigger sticks because the other one had a bigger one. Europe slowly turned into a continent preparing for a war that no one openly admitted, yet everyone silently expected. Another layer of danger came from alliances. European powers formed agreements to support each other in case of conflict. On one side stood the group of Britain, France, and Russia. On the other side stood Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. These alliances were like a promise. If you fight my friend, then I will fight you, even if I do not want to. With these webs of alliances stretching across countries, any small conflict had the potential to drag everyone into the fire, and then came the spark. In the summer of the year when everything changed, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, visited Sarajevo. A group of Serbian nationalists had decided to kill him. During the visit, a young man named Gavrilo Princip shot the Archduke and his wife. This single event shook the world. Now you might wonder, how can one assassination start a world war? The answer lies in pride, alliances, and decades of tension. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia. Serbia turned to Russia for support. Austria sought help from Germany. Germany promised full backing. One support call led to another, and soon the situation spiraled out of control. For several weeks after the assassination, European leaders exchanged telegrams, issued ultimatums, held emergency meetings, and made threats. The situation felt like a dramatic series with new twists every day. One country declared war, another mobilized its army, another joined to support an ally, and within days nearly all major European powers were pulled into the conflict. It was like a long line of dominoes. Once the first fell, the rest followed automatically. What began as a regional conflict quickly turned into a global war. This happened because European powers controlled colonies all over the world. When Britain, France, and Germany fought, their colonies also became involved. Soldiers from India fought in Europe. Troops from Africa fought in the Middle East. Japan joined the war. The Ottoman Empire joined Germany's side. Slowly, the conflict expanded far beyond Europe. But beyond the political story, there is another side. The human story. Millions of young men were sent to trenches filled with mud, rats, and constant danger. Soldiers lived in fear of shells, snipers, gas attacks, and disease. One soldier wrote in his diary that the sun never rises in the trenches, every day feels like night. This was the first industrial war, where machines decided life and death. So, why did the First World War happen if we put all the complexities aside and describe it in the simplest line possible? The war happened because Europe had built a system filled with rivalry, ego, competition, and alliances. All it needed was a spark. And that spark was the assassination in Sarajevo. Friends, this was the story of why the First World War began. If you want, in the next video we can explore how the war unfolded, why trench warfare became so brutal, and how this war eventually gave rise to another, even larger conflict that shaped our world forever. Once the war began, the armies expected a quick victory. Generals believed the war would be over in a matter of months. They thought soldiers would be home before the winter. But friends, what happened was the complete opposite. Instead of a fast and glorious victory, Europe found itself stuck in a deadly stalemate that lasted year after year. When the fighting started, Germany launched an ambitious plan to defeat France first and then turn east toward Russia. To reach France quickly, they marched through Belgium, expecting little resistance. But Belgium fought bravely, slowing down the German advance. This delay gave France and Britain enough time to prepare. What was supposed to be a lightning strike turned into a long and exhausting struggle. Soon, both sides dug deep trenches across hundreds of miles, stretching from the shores of the Northern Sea all the way down into Central Europe. These trenches became the homes, the battlegrounds, and the graves of millions. Soldiers lived surrounded by mud, rats, rotting food, and the constant sound of shellfire. Imagine sleeping while the ground vibrates underneath you, knowing a single explosion might bury you alive. That was daily life. Trench warfare was not about heroic charges or fast action. It was about endurance. It was about surviving hunger, cold, fear, and disease. When soldiers went over the top to attack, they ran across open ground where every step could be their last. Machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery made advances almost impossible. Thousands died for a few yards of land. It was a horrific, slow-moving nightmare. Poison gas was introduced for the first time in this war. A simple cloud drifting across the battlefield could burn the lungs, blind the eyes, and suffocate anyone it touched. Soldiers started wearing gas masks, but even then, fear remained. The war turned into a laboratory of destruction where new weapons appeared every few months. Tanks, flamethrowers, long-range artillery, and aircraft changed the nature of warfare forever. While the Western Front was frozen in mud and misery, the Eastern Front moved more quickly. Russia struggled with shortages, poor equipment, and internal unrest. Although they had millions of soldiers, their supplies were limited. Many Russian troops went into battle without proper boots or rifles. This weakness eventually pushed the Russian Empire toward collapse, and a revolution erupted that changed their country forever. Meanwhile, far from Europe, battles were being fought in deserts, jungles, and oceans. British forces clashed with the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. Indian, African, Australian, Canadian, and many other soldiers fought under the flags of distant empires. The world was bleeding in every corner as the war dragged on. Europe's food supplies shrank. Civilians stood in long lines for bread. Coal was rationed. Factories turned into war machines, producing shells and guns instead of everyday goods. Women stepped into roles previously dominated by men, working in factories, driving vehicles, running farms, and keeping countries alive while the men were at the front. Then came a turning point. A large country across the ocean, the United States, eventually joined the war. Their entry gave fresh energy, fresh troops, and fresh resources to the side already exhausted by years of fighting. Slowly, the balance began to shift. Germany tried one final massive attack, hoping to win before the newly arrived American forces could make a difference. But the attack failed. Exhaustion, hunger, and loss of morale were weakening the German army. Their allies were collapsing one after another. Inside Germany, People were starving, factories were silent, and protests filled the streets. The war had drained the soul of an entire nation. Finally, Germany could fight no more. A ceasefire was agreed upon. Cannons fell silent. Soldiers stepped out of trenches they had lived in for years. The war was over, but the end of fighting was not the end of suffering. Millions had died. Entire towns were gone. Families were torn apart. And the peace treaty that followed the war created its own problems. It punished Germany harshly, demanded huge payments, and placed the blame entirely on their shoulders. This humiliation, combined with economic collapse, planted the seeds for another conflict that would rise only 2 decades later. The First World War did not close a chapter. It opened a wound that would bleed again. World War I, 1914 to 1918, was a global conflict involving major powers, including the Allies France, Britain, Russia, and the Central Powers Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire. The war was sparked by the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, leading to a complex web of alliances and military mobilizations. Trench warfare, new technologies, and massive casualties characterized the conflict. The war ended with the Treaty of Versailles, imposing harsh penalties on Germany and contributing to World War II. Key outcomes included widespread destruction, loss of life over 37 million casualties, and significant social, economic, and political changes worldwide. Here's a summary of the causes of World War I. Causes of World War I. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's death sparked the war. Imperialism. European powers competed for colonies and resources. Nationalism. Rising nationalist tensions fueled conflicts. Militarism. Military buildup and glorification of war. Alliances. Complex system of alliances drew in multiple countries. These factors combined to create a volatile situation, ultimately leading to the outbreak of war.